The digital gavel slammed down, its sound echoing through the virtual auction hall. Gabriel Reyes blinked, a half-empty mug of synth coffee cooling in his hand. "Did I just bid on a spaceship?" he muttered to himself, scrolling back through the grainy images. Boredom, that old cosmic itch, had led him down this rabbit hole. A late-night auction, a few too many credits burning a hole in his digital wallet, and now he was the proud owner of, well, something. The listing was vague, to say the least. Combat cruiser, fully functional, minor dents, some assembly required, maybe. And the price? A ludicrously low 400 credits. It had to be a scam, right? A cosmic-sized lemon waiting to explode the moment he hit the ignition. But something about the ship, a hulking silhouette in the low-res images, had piqued his interest. Or maybe it was just the caffeine talking. Karanis Prime, the ship's current location, wasn't exactly known for its stellar reputation. A lawless fringe world, a place where smugglers and bounty hunters rubbed elbows in dimly lit spaceports. Perfect for a fixer-upper, he thought with a wry grin. What could possibly go wrong? The contrast between the ship's supposed capabilities and its bargain bin price was almost comical. A fully functional combat cruiser for the price of a decent dinner? It was like finding a vintage Ferrari in a back alley, covered in rust and missing a few wheels. But hey, Gabriel had always been a sucker for a good mystery. And this ship? It was screaming one hell of a story. The docking bay on Karanis Prime was a symphony of clanking metal and hissing steam, the air thick with the smell of ozone and desperation. Gabriel, armed with nothing but his newly acquired digital receipt, stepped onto the loading ramp of his bargain spaceship. The interior was dimly lit, emergency lights flickering like nervous fireflies, casting long, distorted shadows that danced across the battered hull. He hadn't taken 3 steps when a cold, metallic edge pressed against his throat. A plasma knife, humming with barely contained energy, its tip trembling just millimeters from his skin. "Who the hell are you?" a voice hissed, smooth as polished steel but edged with a threat that made the hairs on Gabriel's neck stand on end. He froze, his breath catching in his throat. The woman holding the knife was tall, her posture radiating a coiled, predatory energy. Her skin was a striking azure blue, glowing faintly in the dim light, and her eyes, silver and piercing, held a cold intensity that could freeze a supernova. She was an alien, unmistakably, and every fiber of her being screamed danger. The owner." Gabriel stammered, his voice cracking slightly. "I bought the ship." Her eyes narrowed, the silver orbs flashing like molten metal. "No," she said flatly. "You're not." A tense silence hung in the air, broken only by the hum of the plasma knife and the frantic thumping of Gabriel's heart. Slowly, he raised his wrist, activating the holographic display of his auction receipt. The glowing text flickered in the dim light, "Purchase confirmed. Final bid, 400 credits. Owner, Gabriel Reyes." Zyra's gaze flicked to the display, then back to him, her expression unreadable. She didn't lower the knife. "Trust me," she said, her voice laced with a hint of something that sounded almost like regret. "I wish you weren't." The mystery deepened. Why was this woman so adamant that he wasn't the owner? And why was a ship like this, a warship, being sold off for pocket change? Gabriel had a feeling he'd just stumbled into something far more complicated, and far more dangerous, than he'd bargained for. Zyra, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of galaxies, finally lowered the plasma knife, tossing it onto a nearby console where it clattered against the metal surface. Unbelievable, she muttered, running a hand through her midnight black hair. They actually sold it? Gabriel, his heart still pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs, took a cautious step back, putting some distance between himself and the blue-skinned enigma. Okay, great, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. So, who are you, and why do you seem so opposed to me owning this thing? Zyra, she replied, her silver eyes gleaming in the dim light. And this thing, as you call it, is a Vika-class raider. A heavily modified combat cruiser, fast, armored, outfitted for both stealth and firepower. Designed for military ops and deep space ambush tactics. She spoke of the ship with a reverence that made Gabriel's eyebrows rise. This wasn't just some rust bucket, it was a war machine. And a quick glance around the interior confirmed that. Faint scorch marks marred the walls, a dented panel had been crudely welded shut, and deep scratches in the floor plating suggested something heavy had been dragged across it. This ship had seen action, and plenty of it. So, what exactly did I just buy? Gabriel asked, his voice laced with a growing sense of unease. Zyra's lips curled into a wry smile. Trouble, she said simply. And a whole lot of it. This ship was never supposed to go to auction. Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Gabriel felt a chill run down his spine. What do you mean? Zyra tapped a few buttons on the console, and a holographic schematic flickered to life, displaying the ship's sleek, heavily armed profile. A ship like this doesn't just go missing, she explained. If it ended up in an auction, someone either wanted it gone or didn't realize what they had. And which one is it? Gabriel asked, his gaze fixed on the schematic. Both, Zyra replied, her voice low. And that's where the trouble starts. Gabriel rubbed his temples, trying to process the information overload. So, let me get this straight, he said, his voice laced with a hint of exasperation. I bought a stolen warship with a bounty on its head, and you're telling me it was never supposed to be sold in the first place? Zyra nodded, her silver eyes fixed on him. Pretty much, she replied, her tone laced with a hint of amusement. Fantastic, Gabriel muttered, running a hand through his hair. Just fantastic. He glanced around the battered interior of the ship, taking in the scorch marks and the crudely welded panels. So, what are my options here? Can I return it? Get a refund? Zyra snorted. You're kidding, right? No one in their right mind would touch this ship, not even for scrap. You're stuck with it, Reyes. Gabriel sighed, the weight of his impulsive decision settling heavily on his shoulders. He had a choice to make, walk away and cut his losses, or embrace the chaos and figure out what the hell he'd gotten himself into. Okay, he said, his voice laced with a newfound determination. Then we figure this out. Together. Zyra raised an eyebrow, a hint of surprise flickering across her features. Together. Yeah, together, Gabriel replied, meeting her gaze. You know this ship, you know what's going on. I'm not going to pretend I can handle this on my own. A tense silence hung in the air, the only sound the hum of the ship's engines. Zyra studied him, her expression unreadable. Finally, she extended her hand. Deal, she said, her voice firm. Gabriel took her hand, the contact sending a jolt of energy through him. So, what's in it for you? He asked, his curiosity piqued. A ghost of a smile touched Zyra's lips. I get to keep flying, she replied, her voice laced with a hint of longing. Gabriel nodded, understanding dawning on him. Zyra wasn't just some random squatter, she had a deep connection to this ship, a reason to stay. And he had a feeling that reason was more complicated than she was letting on. But for now, they had a deal. And in this chaotic corner of the galaxy, that was a start. So, Gabriel began, leaning against a console, we've established this ship is hot. But who exactly was flying it before it landed in my lap? Zyra's gaze drifted to the holographic schematic of the Vika-class raider, a flicker of something akin to sadness crossing her features. This ship belonged to the Black Star Legion, she said, her voice low. An elite strike force, ex-military turned mercenary. They took the jobs no one else would touch. And what kind of jobs are we talking about? Gabriel asked, his curiosity piqued. The kind that get you killed, Zyra replied, her tone grim. They were good, damn good. But someone decided they were too good. She gestured towards the bounty list flickering on the console, a chilling array of names, most of them crossed out. Someone wanted them gone, and they had the resources to make it happen. Gabriel scanned the names, a knot tightening in his stomach. And you? He asked, his gaze meeting Zyra's. What's your connection to all this? I was their pilot, Zyra said, her voice flat. One of the last left standing. The pieces started to fall into place. Zyra's combat instincts, her familiarity with the ship, her guarded demeanor, it all made sense now. So, everyone who flew this thing before me is dead? Gabriel asked, his voice laced with a hint of disbelief. Mostly, Zyra admitted. A few are missing, a few ran. But anyone who stayed with the ship, they didn't last long. And this little detail wasn't in the auction listing because... Gabriel prompted, his voice laced with sarcasm. Because the people who sold it were either stupid or trying to get rid of a problem, Zyra said, her lips curling into a cynical smile. Likely both. Gabriel rubbed his face, frustration bubbling up inside him. Fantastic, he muttered. Just fantastic. He had bought a ghost ship, a relic of a fallen mercenary crew, and now he was caught in the crossfire. Zyra watched him, her silver eyes gleaming in the dim light. You could still walk away, she said, her voice laced with a hint of challenge. Sell it for scrap, cut your losses before they start cutting you. Gabriel let out a dry laugh. And let someone else buy this ship and die instead. Zyra's expression shifted, a flicker of something unreadable, respect, maybe, crossing her features. You're different from the usual idiots who get caught up in things like this, she said. Gee, thanks, Gabriel muttered. But deep down, he knew she was right. He couldn't walk away. Not now. He was in too deep, and something about this mystery, about Zyra, compelled him to see it through. Tell me something, Zyra, Gabriel said, his voice cutting through the tense silence of the cockpit. You've been living on this ship for 2 years. If you wanted to keep it so badly, why didn't you just claim ownership? Zyra sighed, running a hand through her dark hair. Because it was safer being a ghost, she replied, her voice low. Safer for who? Gabriel pressed, his eyes fixed on her. Her silver eyes met his. Me, she said, her voice laced with a hint of vulnerability. And now, you. The weight behind those words settled heavily in the air. Gabriel had thought he was just some unlucky guy who bought the wrong ship. But Zyra, she had been hiding, running from something, someone. And now, thanks to his impulsive purchase, he was tangled in her mess. So, What are you running from, Zyra? He asked, his voice softer now. People who want me dead, she replied, her tone flat. People who don't care who they have to kill to get what they want. And what is it they want? Gabriel asked, his curiosity piqued. This ship, Zyra said, her gaze drifting to the battered hull. And what's on it? And you think they'll stop at nothing to get it? Gabriel asked, his voice laced with a hint of disbelief. They already haven't, Zyra replied, her voice grim. Everyone who's been connected to this ship, they're either dead or missing. And now, you're on their list too. A chill ran down Gabriel's spine. He had walked into a hornet's nest, and now he was getting stung. So, where does that leave us? He asked, his voice laced with a hint of resignation. Zyra pushed off the console and stretched, her movements fluid and graceful. Depends, she said, her silver eyes gleaming. How good are you at flying? Before Gabriel could answer, a flashing red alert blared across the console. Incoming transmission, a computerized voice announced. Unauthorized scan detected. Lighthouse area coordinates. Gabriel's stomach dropped. Someone had found them. And they weren't going to send flowers. Gabriel knew something was off the moment he woke up. The air smelled different, warm, sweet, and dangerously intoxicating. It clung to the inside of his lungs like spiced heat, sending an unwelcome shiver down his spine. His body felt unusually tense, yet somehow too relaxed at the same time. Then he saw her. Zyra stood near the ship's small refresher unit, her hair still damp from a shower, strands curling against her blue skin. She wore one of her usual sleeveless tops, but this time it clung differently, softer, looser, revealing just enough to make his brain misfire. And she smelled like cinnamon and something else, something richer, headier. Gabriel sat up too fast. Are you wearing perfume? Zyra glanced over, amused. No. He frowned, rubbing the back of his neck. The sensation didn't fade. Then why does the whole damn room smell like dash? His brain clicked. Wait. Is this you? Zyra's lips curved into a sly smile. It's a pheromone. She stepped forward, and the scent intensified, wrapping around him like invisible silk. Most species find it overwhelming. Gabriel swallowed, his pulse spiking. Ha. Joke's on you. I think it's kind of nice. Her silver eyes darkened with something unreadable. Is that so? He regretted saying it instantly. Zyra was already predatory on a normal day, but now she looked interested. She took another step forward, and every hair on Gabriel's arm stood on end. Humans have a strong response to scent, don't they? She murmured, her voice dropping lower. His throat went dry. I wouldn't say strong. She was close now, the heat from her skin radiating in the narrow space between them. Gabriel's heart thundered in his chest. Me, she murmured, then she leaned in, her lips brushing just below his jaw. Gabriel sucked in a sharp breath, his entire body locking up, caught between fight, flight, and the very real possibility that he didn't want to do either. Zyra's mouth curved against his skin. Interesting. Her hands pressed against his chest, warm fingers splaying over his shirt. You're tense, she said, tilting her head as if studying a puzzle. Do I make you nervous? Yeah, absolutely, 100%, he said, his voice cracking spectacularly. Zyra chuckled, the sound wickedly pleased. Gabriel gripped the bed frame, grounding himself. Is this some kind of test? She hummed. maybe. And then she kissed him. The kiss was a spark, a jolt of raw energy that left Gabriel reeling. Zyra pulled back just enough to smirk, her silver eyes gleaming with amusement. "What's wrong, Reyes?" she purred, her voice laced with a playful challenge. "Can't handle a little pheromone exposure?" "Little?" Gabriel exhaled sharply, his heart still pounding against his ribs. "I think I'm hallucinating. Either that, or I'm about to make some very bad decisions." Zyra laughed, a genuine, low, throaty sound that sent another shiver down his spine. "Aren't they the same thing sometimes?" she asked, her lips curving into a mischievous smile. She traced a finger up his chest, over his collarbone, to his throat, her touch sending a jolt of electricity through him. Gabriel stiffened, not out of fear, but anticipation. Zyra noticed, her smile sharpening. Then, just as quickly as she'd started, she pulled away, rolling off him with an infuriating amount of control. Gabriel nearly swore out loud. Zyra stretched, feline and unbothered, then casually ran a hand through her hair. "You're lucky I like you," she said, her voice amused, but her breath wasn't quite steady yet. Gabriel groaned, scrubbing a hand down his face. "That felt a lot more like torture than luck," he muttered. She smirked. "Aren't they the same thing sometimes?" Gabriel let his head fall back against the bed, trying to regulate his breathing. The air still smelled like her, his skin still buzzed where she'd touched him. This was going to be a problem. A very, very big problem. The silence between them stretched, thick with unspoken tension. Gabriel sat at the edge of the cockpit, hands braced on his knees, trying to shake the lingering sensation of Zyra's warmth, her scent, the weight of her body against his. She had pulled away like nothing had happened, like he wasn't still feeling her lips on his skin, like she hadn't left him hanging in a way that could only be described as cruel. But before he could even process that mess, reality came crashing back down. A shrill alert flared across the control panel. "Incoming transmission," a computerized voice announced. "Encrypted origin." Zyra, already in the co-pilot's chair, raised a brow. "Someone wants to talk," she said, her voice laced with a hint of suspicion. Gabriel exhaled, dragging a hand through his hair. "If this is another bounty hunter, I'm going to throw myself into space," he muttered. "And make their job easier," she mused, tapping the console. "Let's hear it." The holographic display flickered to life, revealing a masked figure, their voice distorted through encryption. "Gabriel Reyes, Zyra Vallis," the figure began, their tone cold and impersonal. "You've made quite the mess." Gabriel barely had time to recover from the pheromone-induced chaos before the ship's warning klaxons screamed to life. The flashing red alert on the console pulsed like a frantic heartbeat. "Incoming transmission," Zyra announced, her voice sharp and focused. "Unauthorized scan detected. Zanti Guild area coordinates." Gabriel's stomach dropped. The Zanti Guild. They weren't just bounty hunters, they were high-end mercenaries, the kind who didn't take a job unless it was worth an obscene amount of credits. "That's bad," he muttered, gripping the armrests. "Very bad," Zyra confirmed. "They don't come cheap, which means someone's put a serious bounty on our heads." Another alert flared. "Target acquired," the ship's computer announced. "Preparatory systems online. Locking missiles." "Yeah, that's a no for me," Gabriel said, his voice laced with a hint of panic. "You might want to strap in," Zyra said, her voice unnervingly calm. She punched the thrusters, and the ship roared to life beneath them, lurching sideways just as a streak of plasma fire ripped through the space where they'd been a moment before. Gabriel barely had time to grab his harness before the acceleration slammed him back against his seat. "Are they shooting already?" Gabriel shouted, gripping the armrests. "Aren't bounty hunters supposed to take people alive?" "Depends on the bounty," Zyra replied, twisting the controls, the ship rolling hard to dodge another barrage. "If they think we're too much trouble, they might take the easy payout, which is blasting us into space dust." "Fantastic," Gabriel muttered. He glanced at the weapons console. "Tell me we have something to fight back with." "Plenty," Zyra said, flipping a switch. A row of concealed cannons slid out from the ship's hull. "I knew this thing had secrets," Gabriel said, his eyes widening. Zyra grinned. "Hold on tight." The ship bucked hard, and then she fired. Twin bursts of ion fire streaked through the void, slamming into the bounty hunters' shields. The enemy gunship veered sharply, struggling to regain its position. Zyra didn't give them a chance. She pulled the ship into a tight spin, lining up the next shot. Gabriel felt the energy build, the hum of the cannons growing as the ship's systems rerouted power. "Zyra," he warned, watching as a second target appeared on the sensors. They brought back up. A second Xanti vessel dropped out of warp, bigger than the first, heavily armored. "We can't take both of them," Gabriel shouted. Zyra didn't argue. Instead, she hit a sequence of controls that sent the ship into an impossible nosedive, skimming just above the surface of a nearby asteroid belt. "New plan," she said, her voice laced with adrenaline. "We run." Gabriel held on as the ship dove into the chaos of tumbling rocks. The Xanti ships followed, dodging debris with expert precision. They were faster, but Zyra was smarter. She schemed between two massive asteroids with inches to spare, forcing their pursuers to pull up. One barely cleared it, but the second wasn't as lucky. A sickening crunch echoed through the comms as the larger gunboat clipped an asteroid, spiraling out of control. "One down," Zyra muttered. Gabriel glanced at the display. The smaller hunter ship was still right on their tail, matching every maneuver. Zyra's fingers danced over the controls. "I need a few seconds to set up a warp jump." Gabriel's gaze flicked to the rear sensors. "We don't have a few seconds." The gunship charged its weapons. They were out of time. Without thinking, Gabriel grabbed the targeting controls and fired a missile, aiming not for the ship, but for the asteroid directly above it. The Xanti pilot, clearly skilled, dodged right at the last second, exactly as Gabriel had hoped. The missile didn't hit the ship, it hit the asteroid. A massive chunk of rock broke loose, slamming into the Xanti vessel before the pilot could react. The ship spun violently before disappearing in a flash of flaming debris. Gabriel stared, his heart pounding. "Did you just dash?" Zyra blinked, then a slow grin spread across her face. "I think I just won us a dogfight." "Not bad, Reyes," she said, her voice laced with a hint of admiration. "Maybe you're not entirely useless." Before Gabriel could come up with a sarcastic response, the warp drive engaged, and the stars outside stretched into infinity. The ship jumped, and just like that, they were gone. Gabriel stretched, his muscles protesting with a chorus of aches and twinges. The high-speed chase through the asteroid belt had taken its toll, leaving him feeling like he'd gone 10 rounds with a particularly angry grav field generator. He wasn't sure how much time had passed since they jumped to safety, but the adrenaline was still pumping, a frantic drum beat against his ribs. The Zanti Guild wouldn't give up easily. They were professionals, and professionals hunted until the job was done. They weren't safe. Not yet. A door slid open behind him, and he felt Zyra's presence before he turned. That warm, spice scent, curling into the air like invisible fingers, cinnamon, heat, something deeper. He didn't look right away. He knew if he did, his brain would short-circuit, and he'd be reduced to a stammering mess. When he finally glanced up, he saw her leaning against the doorway, arms crossed, watching him with that infuriating mix of amusement and curiosity. Her midnight black hair was still damp, falling in loose waves against her blue skin. The dim ship lights cast a soft glow across her collarbone, highlighting the smooth planes of her shoulders. She had changed into a fresh tank top and loose cargo pants, but somehow, she made even casual look predatory. His pulse kicked up before he could stop it. "You're tense," she observed, tilting her head. "It's making you slow." Gabriel exhaled through his nose, rolling his shoulders. "Tends to happen when people try to kill me," he replied, his voice laced with a hint of sarcasm. Zyra smirked, padding barefoot toward him. "You did well today," she said, her voice surprisingly soft. Gabriel arched a brow. "Is that your version of a compliment?" "Take it however you want," she said, stopping just beside him. The air crackled between them, charged with unspoken tension. Gabriel could feel her gaze on him, assessing, probing. He had a feeling she wasn't just observing his physical state, she was trying to gauge his reaction to her, to the pheromones, to the lingering heat of their interrupted kiss. Then, without warning, Zyra swung a leg over his lap and straddled him. Gabriel's body went rigid, his fingers hovering near her waist, unsure whether to grab her or push her away. He said eloquently. "What dash?" Zyra placed her hands against his chest, applying just enough pressure to make his muscles lock beneath her touch. "Relax," she murmured, her fingers trailing up to his shoulders. "You need this." Gabriel swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. "Pretty sure this is against intergalactic pilot codes," he managed to stammer. She chuckled, low and throaty. "Humans are so touch-starved. You act like basic physical relief is illegal." His pulse jumped at the way she said relief. Gabriel had been in combat, been thrown into life-threatening situations, but nothing compared to this. She worked her fingers into the knots along his shoulders, pressing firm, knowing exactly where to dig in. Her touch was confident, precise, and it sent heat spreading through his chest, coiling lower in ways he refused to acknowledge. "You're so tight," she murmured, her thumbs kneading deep. "Yeah, no kidding," Gabriel replied, his voice strained. "Maybe," he said, "because someone made me dodge missiles for an hour." Zyra leaned in slightly, her lips brushing just below his ear. "Or maybe," she murmured, "it's something else. Something I think about all the time." His breath hitched. His hands itched to grip her hips, to pull her closer, but he forced them to stay still. She was doing this on purpose. The realization should have made him irritated, instead, it made him want to see how far she was willing to go. "You enjoy torturing me, don't you?" he muttered. Zyra smiled against his skin. "A little." Then, in one deliberate motion, she rolled her hips just enough for him to feel the full weight of her body against his. His breath caught. Her smirk deepened. "Are you sure you're not enjoying this?" Gabriel's restraint snapped. He gripped her waist, fingers pressing into the smooth skin beneath her tank top, pulling her closer than she'd probably intended. Zyra, he said, his voice lower now, rougher. She tilted her head, silver eyes watching him like he was an equation she wanted to solve. Are you asking me to stop? She whispered, her breath ghosting across his lips. His heart slammed against his ribs. Not even a little. Gabriel didn't answer with words. He kissed her, the force of his desire taking them both by surprise. Zyra sighed against his mouth, her fingers threading into his hair, nails scraping lightly against his scalp. The sensation sent heat pooling low in his stomach. Her lips parted slightly, allowing him deeper, tasting her warm, spiced, heady like a drug. Gabriel lost himself in her. For the first time since stepping onto this cursed ship, nothing else existed. No bounties, no warships, no danger. Just her hands, her body, the way she moved against him with maddening precision. His fingers schemed under her top, tracing the curve of her spine. Zyra shuddered, a soft gasp escaping her lips. He felt the way her breath hitched, the slight tremble that betrayed just how much she was holding back. So, she wasn't as unaffected as she pretended. That changed things. Gabriel broke the kiss, lips brushing the sensitive skin of her jaw. Her breathing was uneven now, her fingers tightening in his hair. You always in control, Zyra, he murmured against her throat. She stiffened, just for a second. That second was enough. Gabriel pulled back slightly, just enough to meet her gaze. Challenge flickered behind her silver eyes, but so did something else, something unspoken, something dangerous. Zyra exhaled slowly, then, as quickly as she had started, she pulled away, slipping off his lap. Gabriel nearly swore out loud. Zyra stretched, infuriatingly calm, then ran a hand through her hair. You're lucky I like you, she said, her voice amused, but her breath wasn't quite steady yet. Gabriel leaned back, trying to get his own pulse under control. That felt a lot more like torture than luck, he muttered. She smirked. Aren't they the same thing sometimes? Gabriel let his head fall back against the booth. The air still smelled like her, his body still buzzed from where she touched him. This was a problem. A very, very big problem. But for the first time, he felt like he had a say in how it was handled. The silence between them stretched, thick with unspoken words and lingering heat. Gabriel sat at the edge of the cockpit, hands braced on his knees, trying to shake the lingering sensation of Zyra's warmth, her scent, the weight of her body against his. She had pulled away like nothing had happened, like he wasn't still feeling her lips on his skin, like she hadn't left him hanging in a way that could only be described as cruel. But before he could even process that mess, reality came crashing back down. A shrill alert flared across the control panel. Incoming transmission, a computerized voice announced. Encrypted origin. Zyra, already in the co-pilot's chair, raised a brow. Someone wants to talk, she said, her voice laced with a hint of suspicion. Gabriel exhaled, dragging a hand through his hair. If this is another bounty hunter, I'm going to throw myself into space, he muttered. And make their job easier, she mused, tapping the console. Let's hear it. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing a masked figure, their voice distorted through encryption. Gabriel Reyes, Zyra Vallis, the figure began, their tone cold and impersonal. You've made quite the mess. Gabriel's stomach tightened. Yeah, well, he muttered, crossing his arms. Making messes is kind of a hobby. The figure ignored him, turning their attention to Zyra. You should have stayed buried, they said, their voice laced with a hint of menace. Now, your past is coming to collect. Zyra didn't flinch, but Gabriel saw the shift, a slight tension in her jaw, the way her fingers curled against the armrest. He straightened. Who the hell are you? He demanded. The masked figure tilted their head. A friend, if you listen. A problem, if you don't. Gabriel clenched his jaw. He was really tired of vague threats. Great, he said, his voice laced with sarcasm. That clears everything up. The figure continued, their voice low and menacing. That ship you're sitting in, it's not just some decommissioned raider. It carries something valuable, something powerful, and a lot of people want it back. Then why haven't they come for it themselves? Zyra cut in, her voice sharp. A pause, then, because no one knows exactly where it is. Until now. Thanks to your little stunt with the Zanti Guild, every major faction knows that ship still exists. Gabriel felt his pulse spike. So, we painted a target on our backs, he muttered. A big one, the figure confirmed. You have two options, run, and they will find you, or sell the ship and let this be someone else's problem. Gabriel's gut twisted. He glanced at Zyra, expecting her to scoff, to argue, to do anything but sit in silence. But she was still, too still. For the first time since he'd met her, he saw hesitation. That scared him more than the transmission itself. The masked figure leaned forward, their distorted voice echoing through the cockpit. That ship you're sitting in, it's not just some decommissioned raider. It carries something valuable, something powerful, and a lot of people want it back. Then why haven't they come for it themselves? Zyra cut in, her voice sharp. A pause, then, because no one knows exactly where it is. Until now. Thanks to your little stunt with the Zanti Guild, every major faction knows that ship still exists. Gabriel felt his pulse spike. So, we painted a target on our backs, he muttered, the realization sinking in. A big one, the figure confirmed. You have two options, run, and they will find you, or sell the ship and let this be someone else's problem. Gabriel's gut twisted. He glanced at Zyra, expecting her to scoff, to argue, to do anything but sit in silence. But she was still, too still. For the first time since he'd met her, he saw hesitation. That scared him more than the transmission itself. The masked figure spoke again, their voice laced with a hint of urgency. Think fast, Reyes. Time isn't on your side. Then, the transmission cut out, leaving only the dull hum of the ship in its wake. Silence filled the cockpit, thick and suffocating. Gabriel turned to Zyra. All right, he said, his voice sharp. What the hell aren't you telling me? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she leaned back, exhaling through her nose, her gaze locked on the endless void of space beyond the viewport. Then, finally, they're right. We should sell it. Gabriel stared. Excuse me. Zyra met his eyes, her expression unreadable. You didn't sign up for this. You bought the ship as a joke. You could take the money, get out, and never look over your shoulder again. His jaw tightened. And what about you? She hesitated, just for a second. That's not your problem. Wrong answer, Gabriel said, standing abruptly. Like hell it isn't. Zyra's gaze flicked up, cautious. Reyes, let me get this straight dash. No, he cut in, his voice sharp. You dragged me into this, didn't tell me half of what was going on, And now you want me to just walk away? She didn't blink. Yes. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Not happening. Zyra exhaled through her nose. You don't know what you're signing up for. Then tell me, Gabriel challenged. For the first time, she looked conflicted. Then, finally, she spoke. The Black Star Legion, she said slowly, her voice quieter now, wasn't just a mercenary crew. We took a contract we shouldn't have. A job to steal something from the Imperium. Gabriel frowned. The Imperium? As in, the most powerful military force in the galaxy. Zyra nodded. And we succeeded. But we never got paid. Because before we could collect, someone started hunting us down. One by one. Something cold settled in Gabriel's chest. Whatever we stole, Zyra continued, it's still on this ship. And someone is willing to kill every last person who touched it. Whatever we stole, Zyra continued, her voice low and grave, it's still on this ship. And someone is willing to kill every last person who touched it. Gabriel's breath came slower now, a cold dread settling in his gut. So, that's why you never left, he said, the realization dawning on him. She nodded once, her silver eyes reflecting the flickering lights of the console. Because the second I step off this ship, I'm a dead woman. Gabriel ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. He could walk away. He could sell the ship and let someone else take the risk. But if he did, Zyra wouldn't just disappear. She would die. The realization hit him harder than it should have. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Well, that settles it then. Zyra narrowed her eyes. Settles what? He turned to the control panel, inputting new coordinates. We're keeping the ship. She stared at him, incredulous. Reyes dash. He continued, flicking switches with newfound purpose. We're going to figure out what's on board that's worth killing over. Zyra hesitated, her gaze searching his. You don't have to do this. Gabriel met her gaze, his expression firm. Yeah, he said. I do. She studied him, searching for something, before finally exhaling. Then, slowly, she smirked. You really are a terrible decision. Gabriel grinned. And yet, here we are. He locked in the jump coordinates. Where to? Zyra asked, her voice laced with a hint of anticipation. He leaned back, eyes gleaming. Let's go find out what we're worth dying for. The ship lurched forward, engines roaring as they jumped into the unknown. The metal groaned as it settled into the vast emptiness of uncharted space. Gabriel's hands hovered over the controls, his pulse steady despite the storm brewing in his mind. Zyra sat beside him, her silver eyes scanning the dark void beyond the viewport. No planets, no stations, no signs of life. But the coordinates led them here. Are you sure this is the place? Gabriel asked, frowning at the readings. Zyra tapped the console, bringing up a faint signal, weak, fragmented, buried under layers of interference. It's here, she said, her voice low. A hidden transmission. A message waiting to be found. Gabriel swallowed. Let's hear it. Zyra activated the playback. The speakers crackled to life, distorting a voice that shouldn't exist anymore, a voice Zyra recognized instantly. Alice, if you're hearing this, I hope you're still breathing. Her breath caught, a wave of emotion washing over her. Gabriel glanced at her, his expression questioning. You know him? She nodded, too stunned to speak. Because the voice belonged to Commander Ryland Kess, leader of the Black Star Legion, a man who had been dead for 2 years. The message continued, laced with static. They got to me first, but I left you a way out. The package is still on board, hidden where only you would think to look. But be careful, Zyra. They don't just want what we stole, they want to erase anyone who's ever touched it. Zyra's fingers clenched the edge of the console, her knuckles white. Gabriel leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the flickering holographic display. What package? The transmission glitched, skipping ahead. You were always the best of us, Valis. If anyone makes it out of this, it's you. Find it, decide what to do with it. A pause, then softer this time, and if you ever see Reyes, tell him I was wrong about him. Gabriel froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The transmission cut off, leaving only the dull hum of the ship in its wake. Silence settled between them, heavy and charged with unanswered questions. Zyra exhaled, pushing back from the console. We need to find it, she said, her voice firm. Now. Gabriel nodded, rising to his feet. Agreed. The storage bay was cold, lit only by flickering emergency strips along the walls. Gabriel had searched this place twice before, but whatever Kess had hidden, it wasn't obvious. Zyra moved like she already knew where to go. She crossed to the back wall, kneeling beside a small maintenance panel he hadn't thought twice about. A few swift motions, and the panel clicked open, revealing a reinforced lockbox. Gabriel let out a breath. How the hell did you know it was there? Zyra smirked faintly. Because I installed it? She pulled the box free, fingers ghosting over its surface before she keyed in a sequence only she knew. A soft hiss of pressurized air escaped as the lid lifted. Inside, nestled in shock foam padding, lay a sealed data drive. Gabriel frowned. That's it? Zyra shook her head. No, that's everything. She lifted the drive carefully, turning it over. This is what we stole. This is why the Black Star Legion was hunted down. Gabriel crossed his arms. Any guesses what's on it? Her silver eyes met his. Only one way to find out. The choice that could change the galaxy. They returned to the cockpit, tension thick in the air. Gabriel plugged the drive into the ship's interface, and a holographic projection flared to life. Lines of Imperium encryption scrolled across the screen, unraveling into classified reports, hidden transmissions, intercepted battle plans. And then, the real secret, a list of names, thousands of them. Gabriel leaned in, scanning the records, his stomach sinking. These are civilians, he said, his voice laced with disbelief. Zyra's jaw tightened. Not just civilians. She tapped the screen, highlighting a phrase stamped across the files, Imperium experimental subjects. Gabriel felt sick. They were running human experiments. And killing anyone who got too close to the truth, Zyra finished, her voice grim. That was the real reason the Black Star Legion was erased. Not for stealing money or weapons, but for stumbling onto evidence that could topple an empire. Gabriel exhaled sharply. This is why they want us dead. Zyra nodded. Because if this gets out, the Imperium burns. A heavy silence followed, broken only by the hum of the ship's engines. Then, Gabriel straightened, his expression determined. So, what do we do with it? Zyra hesitated, her gaze drifting to the data drive. We could sell it, she said, her voice laced with a hint of longing. Get enough credits to disappear forever. Gabriel studied her, his eyes searching hers. "But that's not what you want," he said, his voice soft. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders slumping slightly. "No," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "It's not." Gabriel smirked, a hint of mischief in his eyes. "Then let's blow this thing wide open." Zyra blinked, a flicker of surprise crossing her features. Then, for the first time in days, she really smiled, not the teasing, sharp-edged smirk he was used to, but a genuine, warm smile that lit up her face. "Then we'd better find someone who can handle the fallout," she said, her voice laced with a newfound determination. Gabriel grinned, a plan forming in his mind. "I know just the place." He turned back to the controls, setting a new course. For the first time since this mess started, they weren't running. They were going straight at the fire. The ship hummed beneath them, locked in for the jump. Gabriel leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. Zyra watched him, something unreadable in her gaze. "You could have let me sell it," she said, her voice quiet. "You could have walked away." "You could have too," Gabriel pointed out, his eyes meeting hers. She smirked, a hint of her usual playful demeanor returning. "Guess we're both idiots then," she said. "Yes," he agreed, a small smile playing on his lips. Silence stretched again, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence filled with a newfound understanding, a shared purpose. Then, Zyra reached over, her fingers brushing his wrist in a silent acknowledgement. Gabriel turned his hand over, catching hers gently in his own. Her silver eyes softened. "You sure about this?" she asked, her voice laced with a hint of concern. Gabriel's grip tightened, his eyes meeting hers. "You with me?" he asked, seeking confirmation. "Yeah," she replied, her voice firm. "I'm sure." The ship jumped into hyperspace, carrying them toward whatever future they had just chosen. For the first time since this mess started, they weren't running. They were going straight at the fire, together. They had a plan: find someone who could handle the fallout, someone with the resources and influence to expose the Imperium's crimes to the galaxy. They had a destination in mind, a place where secrets were currency and information was power. As the ship hurtled through the void, Gabriel couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking a tightrope, one wrong step away from falling into the abyss. But he also knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that they were doing the right thing. They were no longer just a down-on-his-luck buyer and a fugitive pilot. They were allies, partners, bound by a shared secret and a common goal. They were going to expose the truth, no matter the cost.